Hello, everyone, and welcome to Around the Coin. This week, we have an exciting episode with Brian, Faisal, and I, and we dug into a few different topics. There was a lot of hot topics, being that we haven't spoken in a few weeks. Apple obviously blew out the top with their highest Q1 earnings. I think they earned more in a quarter than any company ever in the history of the world. So we talked a bit about that, the sort of belief in Apple Pay behind Tim Cook and his doubling down on that, what it means. Brian had actually conducted a few interesting research studies and breaks us down with some numbers there. We move on to Coinbase and their announcement of not only their $75 million round, but their aim to take a stand in the regulatory climate for Bitcoin, meaning they want to create the standard to transact Bitcoins. And Faisal obviously just took hold of that with his knowledge around remittances, meaning transactions from in country to out of country, mostly for families transferring value, money back to their home country, and how this just improves the overall climate for that. Next, we moved on to me. So I traveled to Australia and to New Zealand over the last few weeks, exploring the land, and I spoke a bit about the differences, some of the new changes that I saw over there in regards to tipping, payments, and we sort of use that to transition into the partnership with Google. So in sort of a long drawn out explanation, we dissected why Apple Pay would work in Australia and why Google wouldn't, and the transition for Google to partner with WePay. WePay is a company that has about 200,000 e-commerce stores, and they allow you to build an e-commerce transaction payment store, so you can easily create an e-commerce store and sell things independently. The last sort of topic we covered, and this actually got really interesting, was the on-demand economy, how 1099s work, how the payments work to the independent contractors, some of the heat that some marketplace companies have been seeing recently, and what Intuit and Stripe have done together to help take the first step in helping these independent contractors manage their financial future. So this is a tool that Intuit built. They're using Stripe as a payment processor behind the scenes, but it's really in realization that there's not a great collection of tools out there for these independent workers to manage all of their finances, their taxes, and their earnings. So we talked about that, and then I particularly dove into Home Hero, how we handle 1099s, how other marketplaces handle them, and just a high-level crash course on how tax reporting works for independent contractors. So as always, we deeply hope you enjoy this, and if you have any questions, comments, or requests for future topics, let us know, and we hope you enjoy. Thanks, guys. All right, everyone, we are back for I believe this is the second episode of the year. We took a couple weeks off, late January now. Brian, Faisal, and I are excited. We had spent quite a bit of time before the show talking about all the different topics that we have, and we created a list, and we are excited to go through that list with all of you. Brian, Faisal, how are you both doing?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Doing wonderful. A little scratchy here, getting over.
Yep, some laryngitis.
Yeah.
Yep, we missed Brian with a little voice disability. Before the show, we were talking quite a bit about the Apple Pay explosion, or rather the just Apple earning explosion. Faisal, I know you have an interesting infographic. You want to break us down with some mind-boggling statistics?
So yeah, it was the historic, their Q1 earnings were historic, and not only were they historic, they were the highest Q1 earnings, highest quarter earnings for any company ever. You got to let that resonate. They made the most money in a quarter than any company in the history of this planet.
It's absolutely amazing.
Wow.
Which is pretty big. And if you look at the top 10 quarters, the top 10 companies who've made the most money in any given quarter, Apple has 5 positions on that. They're number 1, they're number 4, 5, and 6, and maybe number 9. So that is huge. They made more money than Gazprom, than Royal Dutch Shell, than ExxonMobil. Walmart is not even on the list, imagine. So pretty big.
You got to think, though. You got to think, just looking at that amount of income, how many moving parts are necessary to generate that kind of profit? I mean, the getting down to the individual components and getting those things assembled, the quality control, the marketing.
It blows my
There's
mind.
few things in history that has assembled that much manpower and woman power together to put this together to make a profit. When we compare it to natural resources companies like,
That Shell, Gazprom,
I mean,
ExxonMobil.
there is some obviously human activity there, but it's not technology. It's not where people are putting things together. It's mind blowing, and I think.
Well, they sold 74.5 million iPhones in 90 days.
God.
That is the equivalent of 34,000 phones an hour.
Wow.
Every hour, 34,000 phones. Talk about money. And here's an interesting statistic, rather a number. Apple could actually buy Uber, Tesla, Twitter, Netflix, Dropbox, Snapchat, Airbnb, and even SpaceX, and still have $20 billion left.
Wow. That is insane. So how early do they have to start making these phones? Obviously, they're making them way before they launch in order to make 34,000 per hour, if that's what you said.
Mike, you'll be blown away. No more than 3 weeks.
So in
In fact,
they have how many factories do they have producing 1,000 phones an hour? Do they have 50 factories producing 1,000 each?
no, it's literally 2 factories in China, and
Really?
these factories are huge. They're dormitories. People live on campus.
They're like mini cities, if you will.
Wow.
Yeah. I toured one at one time, and it's mind-boggling how long these buildings are. They go on and on, literally for miles. And, it takes a bit of a hit, like anybody producing electronics in China, about the working conditions. And we'll see if history is favorable to this or not. But a lot of the people that are working there may not have had any opportunity to make any income. And there is some increase in living standard and such. But the type of work that they're doing is highly complex. We assume that there's one big robot making these things. And, I think the estimate that I have seen, about 70 people touch the average iPhone in its manufacture. It's a lot of touching. It's a lot of human behavior and human activity. So it's quite an undertaking, and it's a testament to human ingenuity and creativity. Ultimately, it's just as phenomenal to me as the marketing and the engineering is the aspect of manufacturing. It's one of the reasons why Tim Cook is CEO of Apple. He helped build this supply chain.
Is it something they keep completely locked down, or would they do a documentary on what it looks like inside the manufacturing plant? Or is that top secret Apple?
It's kind of top secret when it comes down to the intimate detail. We're seeing this opening up more, but it's hard to take a country at a substantially low living standard and move them high very quickly. There's actually negative repercussions by having that happen so rapidly, and you're seeing that in parts of China. There are literally cities that have been invented around the building of the iPhone. The iPhone 1, literally the factory did not see the final version until just about 2 weeks before they had to manufacture and ship out the first quantity. And this is a big deal. And
I want to add that not just that, the iMac also won. Because they also set a record, because in this day and age of declining sales, Apple set a record by selling 5.5 million iMacs.
Wow. Are those all made in the same factory? I mean,
no.
Are they completely different?
Completely different
products?
factories. Yeah. Completely different setups. The Mac Pro is actually built in the United States, most of it. So we're starting to see some of this come back to the U.S. I might also add that the Apple Watch, which I'm predicting to sell out, I'm not predicting the quantity, but I will predict that the first round will sell out in a massive way. I'm predicting about 48 hours. So. And I'm talking about all versions, but especially the entry-level version. The same thing that went on with the building of the iPhone and the iPad is going to take place with the Apple Watch. Production hasn't even really officially started. which is mind-blowing. Most of the Apple Watches are being built, will be built in next couple of hours, next couple of days. And it's being frozen as far as software, kind of as we speak. There's a whole lot of people testing it right now. I ran into a couple of Apple friends who are literally wearing 2 watches on every arm up in Cupertino and doing everything they can to test it. They literally are putting it out in the wild. They're not hiding it, and they have to test every kind of thing.
That's awesome.
So, anyway, the other aspect to this is Tim Cook, right? What did Tim Cook say during this?
2015 is the year of Apple.
The year of Apple Pay. Yeah, 2015 is the year of Apple Pay. Let me give you a historic perspective here. Out of nowhere, in 90 days, Apple's gotten basically almost every major they got every major bank in the U.S. and just about a majority of the banks in the U.S. to support Apple Pay. Now, this is a moving issue of different elements. You got to get banks to support it. You got to get consumers to support it. You got to get merchants to support it. And then you have to make it such a seductive event that everybody is actively involved. And here we have the CEO of what is now one of the most profitable companies in the world taking a point out to the far field and saying 2015 is a year of Apple Pay. What does that mean? It means that when we round up this year, we're probably going to see more growth within mobile payments, primarily Apple Pay, than I think anybody's been predicting. And I think Tim Cook is telegraphing the future because he knows a lot of stuff that I've been observing for quite a while, that the demand for Apple Pay acceptance at small and medium-sized merchants is explosive. And they don't want to wait. Merchants don't want to wait until somebody at PayPal or Square, leaks something out, at the later part of the year and then gets TechCrunch to write a piece or, another company. Now Apple Pay can be accepted at small merchants. Those small merchants are leaving in droves of whoever does not support Apple Pay, and they'll do whatever they can to get acceptance in. And the reason is very simple. The very early adopters and users of Apple Pay are not only spending more money, they're spending more often. They're changing behavior to use this. Now, that's typical of early adopters. But if you're a business, you don't care about the philosophy. You don't care about the politics. You just know that that person's going to come to your coffee shop more if you have Apple Pay sitting there rather than a really sexy white cash register that looks cool. What you're looking at is a real practical world. And this is driving adoption to a level that I've never seen before. I've been on the ground level of payments for 30 years, and I've never had merchants not ask, but demand that they get Apple Pay acceptance right now. And so Tim knows this. It's filtering up. And a lot of people were, I got to tell you, right after he made that announcement, laryngitis and all, I had a lot of people in the media, reporters, even some of the general news channels contact me and saying, I would have, because they know I'm very supportive of this, obviously. And I would have never guessed a CEO of the most successful company in the world would make that claim. And Tim is not open for exaggeration. Steve Jobs would be a marketer.
He's got data to suggest that, right?
Oh, they're holding back data
and demand, both.
Data and demand. They have obviously been immensely successful in turning banks behind this. That is a massive, massive win for them. And I think we're going to start seeing real hard. Everybody wants hard numbers. Fine, you'll get them. And I think it's going to take place just around the time when Apple Watch is coming out. We're going to hear new announcements about new banks. You're going to have a merchant come out with an app on the iWatch. Apple Watch. I will never be able to get iWatch out of my head. You'll see an app on the Apple Watch that is just going to be amazing. I got to see an early version, and that early version knocked me over. And I've been posting on Quora and Twitter about what I view as the future of what I'm calling watch commerce. And this is where people will be using, nanolocation, iBeacons, and Wi-Fi and GPS and all the other things to be able to order a coffee while you're getting close to a coffee house just by touching your screen. The system will know that this is your regular, and what I mean the system, this layer that of API that Apple is going to be opening up that allows for an incredible amount of creativity for startups will allow these new adaptations to integrate Apple Pay on an API level that we actually haven't seen within iPhone.
Brian, so what's the holdup, right? Why is it the lack of, is there marketing that, if you were to point to one friction point right now, why all my friends don't use Apple Pay? Is it their lack of knowledge of knowing how to use it? Is it the marketing inside the brick and mortar stores?
Gotcha. All right, so here's the question. Apple Pay is like the iPhone when it first came out and there was no app store. How many of your friends actually had an iPhone? Probably very, very, very few. You had a few early adopters, but most people were like, the BlackBerry kind of looks cooler. I had people telling me that. It's got a keyboard and that looks like nice candy, but I'm never going to use that type of thing. The same premise is taking hold within Apple Pay. And the reason is we're in a transitionary period. We're in this period where, okay, I'm not quite certain that a merchant has Apple Pay, therefore, I'll just use my card. Once the needle is moving, I've conducted 3 studies, and they're ongoing, about the actual growth of Apple Pay acceptance. My current number in North America is over 600,000 locations. That's radically higher than the 260,000 that have been quoted by Apple. The unmapped or the unidentified Apple Pay locations is a big challenge for everybody. I might go about solving a lot of those issues as a byproduct, as an artifact of my research. But what is the problem is there's no central reporting. There's no place that you call up and find out all this or whatever. So the bottom line is the growth is actually taking place faster than anybody is recognizing.
Is it the growth of the number of terminals or available usage locations, or is the actual iPad swiping? Because I think there seems to be a ton of availability to use it. It's just a lack of people's understanding to know that they could use it.
Well, I got to tell you this. It's kind of one of those things where, it's... All right, I'll give you a good example. If you walk into most Whole Foods, and I've done this and it's part of my study, you walk into most Whole Foods from Boston to Palo Alto, Cupertino, you're going to see an Apple Pay transaction probably once every 2 minutes, if on a standard day, going down all the different aisles. It's already got high usage within merchants that have identified with the product. If we go into some grocery stores, some grocery stores in the Midwest are seeing Apple Pay transactions every 10 minutes. Now, again, we're 90 days into this, and everybody failed in adoption in 90 days for alternative payment systems. It took 3 years for PayPal to get to this level. 3 years, So, and they had a walled garden of eBay to sort of help that when they finally were acquired by eBay, X.com, et cetera. So we're in this world where our expectations are maybe way too high for the reality. A lot of people in tech are actually not as high in usage as your classic person in the street. I got a lot of psychological reasons why that is, but I've observed that more. I mean, your typical Apple Pay user is a mom who's probably in her mid-30s.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. If you go into Whole Foods right now and you ask who's using Apple Pay, they're going to tell you primarily women, primarily moms with kids.
But that's just everyone in Whole Foods.
It is skewed, obviously, but they're telling you this because this is probably the best news that one could ever have for payments, because that's the last person that's going to use Klinkle if it ever comes out. Excuse me. That's the last person that used a lot of the mechanizations of payment ideas that everybody's come up with. Apple went after that market maybe directly by design, and cracking into that market is massive. And when we get into Apple Pay 2.0 and 3.0, and we have that new layer, that API layer, which allows for loyalty and rewards, that is really going to change and turbocharge this to another level. So the success of Apple Pay, unfortunately, does not weigh on the shoulders of you and me because we're really not the target audience of Apple Pay. That has been the target audience of almost every startup. I want to make something cool that we'll use. That's how Square got started. It's the way how PayPal got started. And who are we? We're generally 26, 25, and we were living at home a year ago, and now we're living maybe in the dog patch with 7 other guys in an apartment we barely can afford. And I want to build something that we will use. The problem is you don't represent us, if we're this creative founding group, we don't represent anything measurably large in the real economy. It's that woman who is raising 2 children, who has 90% of the dollar income of the family under her control. That's the person making the huge financial decisions.
So you're saying Apple is smarter than the 26-year-old in an apartment in dog patch?
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but not to put that down. That's where a lot of creativity comes from. The thing is, you need to balance that incredible energy and creativity with what I call empirical praxis and history and logic. It's like, who really is your market? And if you're not building to that market day one, you have failed.
Yep.
You cannot do it the other way around. Facebook was really designed for your mom.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to admit it today, but if you really look at it, it was designed for your mom. And so was Pinterest.
All right, next topic, Coinbase. Coinbase raised $75 million last week. They are set to take over the world / creating their own mainstream regulated exchange. Fuss, do you want to tap into this one first? I know you had looked at it quite a bit. I know we made the analogy before, the Stripe of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I certainly see it like that because they're a merchant processor for Bitcoin. They have their own wallet. It's only a natural selection of things that they go and get their own exchange. And I don't think so that was the intended purpose. I think it happened when previously they had the exemption that if you were a merchant processor as defined by FinCEN for Bitcoins, you had an exemption. You weren't required to have an MSB license. However, that changed on 27th October when the new ruling came out and FinCEN classified merchant processors to be registered as MSPs, i.e. go get your money transmitter licenses. And I guess someone in the company must have said, well, you know what, since we're getting the licenses, we might as well open our own exchange, which I think makes perfect sense. Why send your money abroad to exchanges like Bitstamp or, the other Canadian exchanges, etc., to get rid of your coins or buy coins when you can do it stateside? So it's the equivalent example, the analogous example of, the jobs coming back to the US. So the trade is coming back to the US, the money is coming back over here. You don't have to park your money in Hong Kong or Slovenia or UK or Canada for that matter. And the settlement times are going to be a whole lot quicker. So I think it's a really great thing that's happening. I think it's going to open up a huge, huge avenue of opportunities in the US, especially for startups, because I'm sure at some point in time an API is going to be released. You're going to have more US financial institutions trade on this exchange because of the fact that it's going to be US based and so forth. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction.
And does this help Coinbase more? Is this a selfish move by them, or are they taking a hit to do something for the industry that help propels it forward?
So there's a huge thing. Is Coinbase going to be the big exchange? The answer is no. No one knows. Is it going to be the only exchange? Again, I don't think so. I think this is not a monopolistic environment. This is not even an oligopoly. I think there are going to be quite a few exchanges. It's going to be just like any other financial institution in the US. Just like you have many, many payment processors, many banks, many merchant processors, etc., many cash checking entities. Coinbase is going to be one of those many in the Bitcoin exchange world.
Faisal, what do you feel, say, the first year financially this will represent to Coinbase? Is it more than the wallet side of it, or is it equivalent?
I think they're going to do fantastic. The number one reason is that they have, if I'm not mistaken, 2.1 million wallets currently that they have.
Just went over the 2 million mark.
So if you have merchants who are processing and merchants want fiat immediately, where do they offload their coins? Well, guess what? They offloaded directly into the Coinbase exchange. People who currently in the US is a very entrepreneurial market. We all know that, and also a very speculative market. So all the speculative, day traders, punters, etc. Nomenclature notwithstanding. Where do they trade? They'll get to trade on a local U.S. exchange. They don't have to ship their money out to UK or wherever it is and wait for 5 days to get the rewards back. They can do it immediately stateside using their bank conveniently. So I think you're going to see a lot of day traders come on. You're going to see a lot of people who are going to try to arbitrage. You're going to see a lot of offloading by the merchant processing that Coinbase is doing onto their exchange. And I think it's going to balance out equally. So I feel that their volumes will pick up. I would not be surprised at all that towards the year end, they'd have the highest volumes, perhaps, North America.
Wow. That was a big deal. And with the Bitcoin price being below $300, do you think that aids Coinbase, or how does it play out?
So I think the price is only for those who think that this is an investment. The price only matters for those who've bought in at $800 and are now saying, well, the hell, I mean, let's be honest. The price only matters to those who think, I'm going to set aside maybe $5,000 into this thing, forget about it for the next 10 years, and hopefully my kid will be able to go to college with that money. I think that's where the price really matters. For all others, it doesn't matter really. The volatility does come into play at some point in time, but for all others, it's the value transfer, the instant value transfer that makes the case. Case in point, cross-border remittances. You want to send money from here to Kenya. You want to send, 10,000 shillings or whatever it is, and you buy the equivalent Bitcoin, send it across, and they're in cashed out. That's it. That instant value transfer is what really, really makes the case over here. Fiverr, for example, started accepting Bitcoins. I'm sure you're going to see more and more wallets worldwide start accepting Bitcoins. And it's the value transfer. If you hold on to the value in Bitcoin, you may or may not, make money. You may make money rather or lose money. But if you do the value transfer and then cash out into your local fiat, I think it's a great case. So I don't think so. The price really comes into play. If anyone has actually looked at it, the trading numbers have actually gone up
substantially. Actually, how do you think this plays into remittances? The fact they open an exchange. Do you feel that this is on the way to that?
No, I don't think so. A Coinbase is going to go into remittances.
Okay.
I think they'll have their APIs open for other startups to come into the space. I can tell you confidently that there are so many startups who are now rethinking, is the right word perhaps, reevaluating their current business plan that they had. We'll open a store, we'll sell Bitcoins at 6%, 9% margin, we'll make a killing, et cetera, et cetera. It's not happening. Everyone seems to be gravitating towards this magical word called remittances, this magical number of $500 billion or $600 billion a year. And let me tell you, a lot of people are going to get burned by it because remittances is not something that you just, hey, let's just get into remittances. And the reason is twofold. Number one is the domain knowledge, which is still a secondary reason. But I think the primary reason is going to be that the diaspora, the people who are actually sending money, need to be cognizant, need to be comfortable with the word Bitcoin. They still trust their grocery store guy. His recommendation to go to certain place and do a money order. Yeah.
It's funny because I've brought this up so often, and I was recently speaking to a group of analysts, and they said, who's the largest money transmitter in the world? And it's like, U.S. Post Office.
U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah, and the reason is that essence of what really I think remittances are about is the idea of security. On all ends, going in and coming out and in transmission. And a lot of people feel, especially in parts of South America, they trust their postal service to deliver a money order by mail.
Yeah, pension checks, all that is still done by the Postal Service. Postal services are de facto banks in almost every country in the world.
Exactly. So And I think it's going to be just what we saw in payments, how seductive it was in the 2012 era, what I call the era of payments disruption, as an ironic term, because
comes to mind. Be towards the direction.
But a lot of people gored, right? This is going to be the running of the bulls.
And yes, exactly. And the funny part is, it's the bulls themselves who are going to get gored by themselves.
Wow. So
I feel the consolidation won't come in because this market, the Bitcoin market, we haven't seen any consolidation. I cannot at least think of an example where someone says, hey, you have exchanges that have not consolidated. You have merchant processors who have not done this thing. So I don't think so consolidation is going to be seen in the next, at least two to 3 years. However, I do see a lot of startups heading in that direction, burning a lot of money, and then, that's it, just withering away, dying up.
Now, Faisal, this is probably, and my memory is not serving me, but Andrea, a few others, just invested in a company in the United Kingdom that is essentially attacking the remittances problem by balancing transactions. You familiar with that transaction?
Are you talking about TransferWise?
Yes. All right. So where do you see concepts like that? I mean, is that
so? In all the emerging markets where remittances are being received, right? So we are talking, these are called net deferred payments or
Sure.
netting off. Netting off is illegal as far as remittances are concerned. India doesn't allow it. UK, let's say Pakistan doesn't allow it. Bangladesh doesn't allow it. Philippines doesn't allow it. Indonesia, Malaysia.
Wow.
I mean, I can keep going on. What they have to look at is their books. Did FDI, foreign direct investment via remittances, come in or not? In this case, it did not. You get the point. I mean, remittances did not come into their books officially. Yes, there was a bleed on the other end, for money going out, but that's already been taken into account. They're allowed to do that, but money did not come in.
So what does this mean for the future? I mean, is this going to be sort of like an Uber, it's better to say I'm going to take place in parts of the world, or how are they going to be able to overcome that obstacle?
So I think we are in the transitionary phase. I think it's inevitable that settlements will be done very, very quickly worldwide, perhaps even on an hourly basis, or if not on a real-time basis.
Wow.
So netting off is something that this world is getting used to. Simple. It's something that the central banks are not used to, not comfortable with. And the knee-jerk reaction is ban them. But I think things like the faster payment rails, the payment rails of cryptocurrencies and altcoins, the ability to do P2P transfers, internationally by netting off. If someone wants to send £1,000 to India, someone from India wants to send £1,000 equivalent back to UK, just net it off. I think these things will come into play. And the reason they can't come into play yet is because of the current accounting systems or the financial systems that they have. They don't understand how such settlements will work. Well, I haven't received money, but money went out from this country. How do we book this transaction?
Faisal,
these are the challenges.
I can speak to a little bit of this. I reviewed there's actually two startups in this space, and one of the ways they're doing remittance in a foreign land. So for example, your wife is running the home in Central America, and she needs the electrical bill or paid. I mean, some of these areas, the electricity is only on for 2 hours a day. And one way is to send her the money. But the other way is to actually pay that bill electronically in the United States. Now, that's a form of remittances, and it's going to be interesting how that's going to decode, because there's no money transmitter there.
No, exactly. I think the original notion was, you used to have family maintenance. Remittances are essentially known as family maintenance,
Sure.
Worker migration. It's not a commercial transaction. It's a family maintenance thing. And part of this family maintenance included, bill payments, school fees, house rent, insurance, medical, etc. The next thing that they're looking at is now, how can we do a direct to biller payment? How can I pay directly to my school, which is in another country? How can I pay directly into the hospital? How can I pay directly for the utility bill directly from sitting and what the advantage of that is that the utility bill companies, the schools, etc., will see again a direct foreign investment into their portfolios, some sort of an advantage. But I think in the end, and I think we've touched upon this thing again and again. In the end, what sort of a payment we're doing? We'll just be doing a person-to-person payment.
Lots of trade issues that come with that.
Pardon me?
The politics element and the balance of trade issues that come with that, right? Money flowing in, money flowing out, and whether or not politics is going to catch up quickly enough to Moore's law and technology that's taking place right in front of us.
Well, I guess politics will always have a role play in everything, but I guess, in the greater scheme of things, I think the central regulators in all the countries will learn to accept that, we have to innovate or we will be really behind. No one wants to turn into a Zimbabwe, So they really, really want to be at the forefront, understand it. Their only thing is that they rather follow rather than lead. Regulators like New York are leading it. Even California is now following what New York is going to do.
I know,
Texas,
it's kind of surprising.
With regards to Bitcoin, and the world is following. So I think I think there are very few leaders. There are very many followers, and with the followers, most of them are just hibernating on the bench right now. So let's see how it goes.
Now, Mike, you had some amazing travels over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Can you give us trails and tales?
Trails, yeah, sure. So I spent the last couple of weeks in New Zealand and Australia on a payment research project. No, it was just a trip to visit my brother who had moved to Sydney. But during that time, it was a sort of wake-up call. It's been a while since I've been in that part of the world. When I used to live in Singapore, I went to Darwin, which is on the northwest kind of tip of Australia.
Yeah.
Certainly removed from the big three cities of the eastern side. And it was really interesting. It was we were talking a bit before the show, but there's a few just social dynamics that sort of stand out as far as your payments category goes. The tipping, no tipping, and the card, the chip card, or the chip on the card, the EMV chip, was the biggest difference in social interactions. We don't hold tabs. If you go to a bar or a restaurant, there's no holding your card behind the bar, which felt like such a better experience, right? Why should this person have to take my plastic piece of thing that I'm 50% likely to forget and have to come back later and you guys charge me a fee for? It's just, why not just swipe it each time? And they have the little chip card reader or the pin pad right there, and you can slide it in and you can process the card. So yeah.
Did you have a chip card with you on?
I actually have 3 credit cards and only one had it.
Which card may I ask?
The Amex. I have a Fidelity Amex.
What was Amex acceptance like in the regions you were visiting?
In terms of if I was declined anywhere?
Well, how often were you seeing no American Express acceptance?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably about the same percentage as here. I would say 30% maybe didn't accept it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's true on a macro level, but that seems to be my experience wherever I end up going. And you can tell, if you go in a 7-Eleven, every 7-Eleven takes it in the world, but, a little liquor store, a small little, and larger restaurants obviously tend to take them. But yeah, I'd imagine they're getting hammered for those fees more.
So the tipping, you've been to, Singapore where tipping is sort of antiquated also. And how did it feel being back in that environment? I mean, you felt liberated knowing that your service is being rendered untipped?
Yeah, it was great. I feel, I don't know quite the origin, Brian, I'm sure you know more about it than I do, about the tipping, at least in the States. But I felt, from your experience here, and you don't notice it until you go somewhere and experience a contradictory point of view or a different experience. But, in the States, you just like any time you go to a restaurant, it's expected, right? Anywhere between 10 to 20%, I believe, is average. Outside those bounds are sort of the higher standard deviation, but it's always expected. And in Australia, I was talking to my brother about this. He's been there over 6 months, and he's like, I've given maybe, the number of tips I can count in one hand. And it shows you that it's just not part of their culture. So it's not like the waitresses are making less money per hour or per year. They're just getting a higher salary and lower tip, which at the end of the day comes from your bill, the same way the restaurant budgets salaries. It's just the money flows differently to them. But the difference in the dynamic I felt was more genuine without tipping. So when you go to a restaurant and someone comes up to you and they ask you if you like drinks, and you go through the process, there's always, it felt very genuine in Australia and New Zealand. Because there's no tipping, it felt like that person is nice, not because they're making money from you and they want to increase their percentage of tip on your bill, but because they actually are, interested in what you're doing and why you're there.
Interesting.
And so I felt
They're
like
compensated well.
they're compensated well enough.
Did it translate into higher average costs at a reasonable restaurant? I mean, when you consider all in a comparable U.S. experience versus...
I don't think so. I think the money would flow different, right? So if you have three constituents, instead of flowing from party A to party B to party C, tipping just cuts that out. But there's no real need to do that, right? If your bill is going to be $80 in the U.S., then it's going to be $100 after tip. But if you go to Australia and it's just $100, then it's just $100.
Interesting. So you didn't really experience outrageous inflation of visiting places that would normally have tip as a basis in the United States.
Yeah, and almost on the contrary view, I could see the frustration in being used to that environment where you see your bill come to $80 and you live in Australia and you pay $80, right? Tax included. And then you come to the States and, then you get your bill and then there's tax and then there's a 20% tip on top of that. And then there's mandatory gratuity if your party's over 6. So it just felt like there's a transparency in all of the payments from the merchants.
Did you feel that they were a little bit more advanced in the United States as far as payment technology and advertisements that you might have noticed and wallets, et cetera?
Yeah, I tried to sort of observe what phones people were using. Definitely less iPhones than there are, particularly in California, but still significant. I was actually expecting less than what I saw. And we would, especially in Queenstown, New Zealand, it's a huge backpacker town. So it's interesting to see that diversity of people from Italy and Germany and France and, South America and everywhere in the world. And just sort of see what they're using. And we would sort of chat about it. Have you heard of Apple Pay? What do you use credit cards? And just seeing what people do. And, of course, the younger demographic is going to have debit cards. They're going to be using cash more so than the older, which is going to be making bigger purchases with credit cards. But certainly a emphasis on a cash society still to a certain extent, although I'd say much less so than I previously experienced. At least in the bigger cities. I can't say I've witnessed Apple Pay used. I'm not sure if they are in Australia. They're not live in
Australia officially. I mean, you could use them between Commonwealth Bank and ANZ Bank. There are a lot of NFC terminals.
I did see. I don't know if Google's advertised there, but I did see a lot of Google Wallet advertisements. Which, I meant to ask you guys, but we were on the topic of Apple Pay, but it seemed like, no one's really given it a full conversation, or we haven't. But Google Wallet, why didn't they, or why are they going to replicate that same Apple Pay experience? And I'm sure, it's a whole separate conversation, and they have to. But it makes me think in parts of the world like Australia, New Zealand, the number of devices is what matters the most. It's not you don't need the Mercedes-Benz of phones, even though producing 75 million would indicate that it's a mass product.
More than Mercedes-Benz. I'm predicting, and we should do a show dedicated a little bit more to this, but I'm predicting Google is probably, let's call it 90 percentile, going to acquire SoftCard, the former ISIS. And it would make a lot of sense. The problem with Team Google, as I call it, is it's highly fragmented. I mean, you're talking about so many different handset manufacturers, so many different flavors of Android software, and a philosophical difference between Google and the people who would normally give you the secured element to have an Apple Pay experience manifest more. But the problem is biometrics. And we talked about this back when Touch ID was, our early Touch ID conversations prior to Apple Pay being released, is Apple owns all the touch scanning fingerprint, whereas the only open patents that are available, open technology, is sliding your finger over a sensor. But Google did some great inroads in Australia. They actually had some great numbers. I was talking to one of my really good friends at Commonwealth Bank, which is one of the largest banks, very technologically savvy bank, I might add, that they are seeing increases in NFC transactions because of Apple Pay, because of the rising of acknowledgement of this sort of technology. But it's on Android platform. It's on Google. So the rising tides is lifting everybody in that.
So Brian, what do you think about the WePay and Google Wallet partnership with 2,000 e-commerce stores that WePay? I mean, what is WePay? How would you explain WePay?
Well, WePay started because somebody was pretty much frustrated. They couldn't, pass money from one friend to another. And so a group of guys in Boston got together in 2008 and ultimately moved to Palo Alto. And I think it was Rich, one of the founders, couldn't pay money at his bachelor's party. Classic founders.
Rich Aberman.
Yeah, Rich. All right. So, this was a company that came up just prior to the payments disruption era of 2010 to 2012. That era has, ended. But their idea was, hey, I want to send money to my friend. Sounds quite familiar. Venmo, right? And they were when Venmo and WePay were kind of duking it out, they were a significant challenge. Venmo broke out of the gates, and obviously now they're captive by PayPal. WePay is built a quite extensive platform. You're looking at quite a few million merchants, and those numbers are interesting that they're publishing. I'll take them for face value. And Google is trying to look at and predict what Faisal's been predicting for quite a while, is what will the world look like after Facebook is fully involved in payments? What is the world going to look like when Facebook, an independent PayPal, and Apple does person-to-person payments, which there's no doubt exists? What is going to happen? And WePay is going to come into the equation. There's stories about, for the last few weeks, that Google was potentially going to acquire them. And the partnership is interesting, to say the least.
Do you think that was that educated assessments, or is that just they've heard the two companies are talking, so we automatically assume acquisition? I can't imagine.
These Silicon Valley rumors are insane. It's funny because I have
and
people,
that's an understatement.
Yeah, I have people me disinformation. It's kind of funny, actually. All during Apple Pay and last 3 years, some of the Square rumors I would get were just insane. And I'm like, you want me to start talking about this? This is some fantasy. I mean, and some of them were so damn nasty against Square. It was like, what are you trying to do? I mean, let the company just kind of do what it's going to do. I mean, and a lot of people just figure, well, you write some stories. I'm like, I'm writing stories because I freaking love the company. It's not what you think. There are people contacting me just so anti-Google, like, oh, Apple's winning. It's like, you don't get it. It's always a dichotomy. It will always be a dichotomy in any type of major thing. And Apple doesn't need to humanize it. They need to bring it to another level and infuse it with the technology of open standards. What I've been saying for a lot of people is Apple Pay ended the tyranny, and again, of companies like Square. If Square was successful with pay with your name and they dominated every merchant on the planet, would that be a fun world to live in, that only one gatekeeper is there and only one process? Excuse me, I think not. What Apple did is something entirely different. They're in the position of being a monopoly. Instead, they said, hey guys, we're going to use an open standard called NFC. We're going to use an open standard called payment card tokenization. We're not going to disrupt Visa and MasterCard and the banks. We're going to have them join our party. We're not going to disrupt every merchant processing relationship. We're going to let them come in. Think about the brilliance of that logic.
Right. Wasn't the big hack, though, the fact that they have the hardware? I mean, that's the only thing that really matters. Right? Square could not have done what they did. They don't have access to the...
Absolutely, they could have. Square was in the spotlight of the world. They were on good.
But they don't have the fingerprint scanner. They don't have that.
hear me out here. They had the hearts and minds of the population in 2012, and if they understood the thesis, it's a very simple thesis. The landowner was going to come back and claim their land. Build your systems around that fact and not around disruption. Build your systems around inclusive mindset rather than exclusive. Don't be so insular. Open up and have APIs. If that logic was there, when Apple finally came out with Apple Pay, the only logical thing would be to sit down with Square, because they would have had a great deal of the hearts and minds of merchants, of banks. I mean, there were banks that were standing in line to talk to this company. You want to know what they did? They didn't even answer the phone. Couldn't even get the phone number. So that insular attitude put them in a position where they are today as a third line. They're not third rate company. They're a great company, but they're third in line now rather than primary in line. But yes, of course, the hardware, the landowners own this, but Apple would have been extremely remiss if Square was in a very strong position, or PayPal for that matter, or Facebook if they were early on this, to not negotiate with them. At this point, it doesn't matter. We'll hear, sometime in August that Square finally produced an NFC reader way too late into the market, and Apple will announce it, and there'll be high fives and everything. But that would have done a tremendous disservice to the Square merchants that need it now. And They could have had it now. So where does this go with WePay? I think we're seeing the beginnings of Google sort of recovering from Google Wallet 1.0 and 2.0. I think they kind of looked at it and said, guys, we're messed up. And Google's pretty much known for end-of-lifing things maybe somewhat too early at times. And a lot of times, people say, well, that's just very gutsy of them to end-of-life something that was doing okay. And I don't know if I fully agree with that philosophy on all things, because they've ended some things that really shouldn't have been. But I think what we're seeing is trying to build coalitions around Team Android, trying to build ways that the Google platform will make sense. The challenge is the gauntlet that was tossed by Tim Cook. We don't care who you spend the money with, how much you spend, etc. You are not the customer. You're not the product. You're the customer. That mentality, it was an arrow at the heart of Google, because Google monetizes their free platforms on the data it collects. And that's what Softcard did. And it's, by the way, one of the reasons why MCX is also going to have the problem is that the consumer data, a lot of times people are just letting, clicking yes and letting it go by. I think we're living in an era where people are starting to take a few steps back.
A lot to be told. One topic I want to cover a bit is the Intuit and Stripe partnership, or the announcement of the Intuit QuickBooks platform for tax management for the independent contractors.
Well, Mike, talk to us about 1099 economy, because you are in the forefront of this. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you're probably one of the best experts on the planet of this right now, right?
Yeah, and especially right now, we're going through, the timing of the season. 1099s are due in the U.S. by federal law on January 31st.
Explain what 1099 means.
Sure. So
let's just
take it from the top. So if you rewind the clock on the sort of form creation on how you report tax income, and I think, who was it that said, Mark Twain or Benjamin Franklin said, or maybe it was Albert Einstein that says he understands all things but except tax.
That's Einstein.
Income. Yeah, it was Einstein.
It is. Yeah,
I forget the exact quote. So, but basically, there used to be a fine line and fairly easy to differentiate between the independent contractors, which are those that do not work directly for your company with the intent to be temporary, or those who are employees of your company on payroll. They get paid on a per monthly or per yearly basis, as negotiated between the two parties. But the agreement is you're paying for someone to have in long term. On a regular basis. And there's different laws set up for both. So the W-2 is what's used for the employees, and the 1099 form is used for independent contractors. And both of these forms are sent to the IRS from the company.
But let's do the demarcation.
Sure.
W-2 is FICA, all the other insurances, right?
W-2.
and the employer has to match the FICA, and all the other type of contributions.
Right.
And 1099, it's a straight payment. The quote unquote employer isn't really an employer; they're paying you like a contractor.
Exactly, and the forms are used to tell the IRS how much you paid the person, right, independent contractor or the employee, so that they can expect a certain amount of tax claiming from their point of view, right? So if we pay Jane $20,000 in 2014, and then we send the IRS this 1099 form that says we paid Jane $20,000 in 2014, and then Jane claims on her income statement that she only made $14,000, well, then the IRS has reason to believe that there's some discrepancy. So that the point of the forms is to inform the government as to what you paid different people.
What's the threshold? Where do you have to generate a 1099? I guess 1099K, right?
Yeah, sure. So here's where it gets a little bit complex. It's not actually the 1099K. The 1099K started in 2012 as sort of a political eruption. So how sort of the creation of these bills work is that there'll be some lobbyist that's trying to have, or he has some agenda, and he gets this bill passed, right? And it creates this new form to put in more tax dollars into the system, whatever the agenda is. It's always political. But then the IRS has pretty clear and transparent intentions. They're not a legislative, they're not a decision arm of the government. They're just merely fulfilling the decisions that the legislative branch made. Which, to their credit, they, I think, do a good job of trying to make it as best as possible for the businesses. They're not on the government side of, necessarily trying to screw over businesses and take as much money as possible, from what I've seen. So they get told what to do. And they get told in 2012 to create this 1099-K. And the difference between the -K and the -MSIC is significant. The number of dollars passed through the MSIC, which has been around forever, that's the traditional form, is a $600 threshold. So if you work for TaskRabbit and you make over $600, then you will receive a 1099 from TaskRabbit, and it will also be sent to the IRS to tell them that you made that. The 1099K is called a payment network. It's meant for payment networks. So the idea is the government wants to receive information from payment networks, third-party payment networks, about how much you were paid. So Balance does a great job of this. Balance actually does a significantly better job of this than Stripe does. In speaking to some of the Stripe support people, they're releasing new marketplace tools that'll make this easier. But right now, Stripe will export information for you, and you have to go and file it yourself. Balance does this all for you. So Balance, PayPal, both do. People actually use, and our company considered going with PayPal Balance because they do this for you. So they'll file the 1099K, and they will submit that to the IRS. The 1099K has a threshold of $20,000, meaning that any of your recipients, if they receive $20,000 in gross or more, they'll have to claim it. If not, they don't. So let me give you an example, a real life example. Lyft. So Lyft takes the stance of, if you go on and sort of dig through their terms and conditions, how it works is if you're a driver on Lyft and you are, and this is a new thing, last year they didn't do this, and if you're a driver on Lyft and you earn $19,995, you will have no 1099 form, right? If you just drive for just shy of $20,000, you receive no tax form. If you drive over that $20,000 threshold and give over 200 transactions or rides, then you receive this 1099K form. Now, what Lyft is doing that's interesting, and there's been various stands from different marketplaces. There's not a congruent stance among all marketplaces, which makes the whole concept more vague and confusing. Nebulous, yeah. So Lyft is saying Stripe is not our third-party payment network. It's actually Lyft itself. So Lyft as a company is a third-party payment network. The tool they're using to run the credit cards is Stripe. But they're basically saying that when a credit card goes through, it's going directly from the person paying to the person receiving it. So this is gross dollars. Now here's where Lyft drivers and independent contractors on these marketplaces can get screwed, is that Lyft has to claim, being a third-party payment network, that the gross number of dollars, so the total number of dollars that the person pays for that ride, is received by the driver. Now, the number that shows up on the driver's tax 1099K form is the total number of dollars that the passenger paid.
Oh, boy.
So you can see why there's
I had no idea that they shifted to that model.
Right. So then the Lyft will claim that is a fee. They'll take a fee out of that.
Exactly.
Now, they also have not to make this even more confusing, you can be one or the other. So you can actually receive both forms. You can receive the 1099 MISC form if you receive things directly from Lyft. So if Lyft pays you bonuses for referrals, if they pay you for mentorship, for mentoring other drivers, those sorts of things. If the money comes directly from Lyft and it's over 600, then they'll issue the standard 1099K. The MISC, the standard 1099 MISC.
Sure.
So I hope this is not too confusing, but it's something that I've spent countless hours over the last month.
You certainly weren't kidding when you said it was confusing.
Huh? And I think it's going to be more apropos as we move more people into this 1099 economy. So what's your view of what Stripe is doing with Intuit? This to me is a huge announcement.
So this is just filing for income tax, right? There's significant claims you can make. Do I write off for our workers? They're all caring for people in the home. So this is, typically seniors. They're coming in, they're driving to the house. Maybe they're driving to an appointment. Maybe they're going and buying groceries. Maybe they're doing random tasks. They're essentially their personal assistant. So there's different things they can write off. They can write off miles when they drive. They can write off purchases they make. But how they do that, how they keep track of it, there's no tools out there. So what Intuit and Stripe realized, particularly Intuit, was that we can help build tools for these independent contractors to keep track of the things, right? So if you rent out your car, if you go grocery shopping, if you deliver on Instacart, whatever it is, you have different write-offs that are non-typical, and there's not really a set of tools out there to manage that. So that, I think, is really the goal in what they've built.
So you're basically running the marketplace of the future, right? Where do you see these tools needing to be? Because I feel like everything is really in a state of flux. Obviously, the confusion you've had to deal with, and the political elements of 1099. What about the actual 1099er, right? How much should I be putting aside for Social Security and FICA? What are my liabilities? I feel like that whole element it's mechanically being done by Intuit, but can you imagine one day where some of your regular, marketplace workers might want to see their money being dispersed into retirement accounts and 401ks and all those things like that? I mean, I've noticed that going in, working with merchants for 30 years. These are pretty much self-employed, a lot of the entry-level merchants, and they always seem to be the last to understand retirement and understand what they should be withholding for their own business and themselves, even with tax accountants and attorneys.
Yeah,
what's your feel on that?
I think it's a huge opportunity and probably a huge problem for the independent contractors, right? I mean, these guys get paid straight, direct cash. Usually, if you're an independent contractor, you're working job to job. You tend to make less on a per annual basis than an employee would make. And being in that category, you probably have less understanding about how to save for the long term, right? There's, career counselors and financial advisors at companies that help employees manage their 401k and their pension and all those sorts of things that help them retire and plan for their financial future. But that doesn't exist for independent contractors. And actually, the other thing that's sort of a stark realization in the marketplace independent contractors and how you could see it's different from the typical independent contractor, which is a painter. This is a guy that comes to your house. Anyone that sort of helps you through a project, they have an EIN number, they have a tax number, they have an establishment. It's a small business, but it is a business. These guys are all, this is Brian, me, and you. I rent my car out and get around. So I'm an independent contractor. It's not something I think of myself as. It's just a service I do, right? Lyft drivers don't think of themselves as their own businesses, but they are, right? They're going to file as such. So I think what the opportunity is build a set of tools, and Intuit prices it at $7, $9 a month for these drivers and everyone else on these marketplaces to essentially use and have the same access to those tools to manage their financial future.
Yeah, to me, I think it's probably one of the biggest potential opportunities is to find ways that you can lift, profit sharing programs, all different things where you can lift up 1099ers into a realm that's more equivalent to the security that one has as far as a future retirement, et cetera, within a decent, company, working for a decent company. But the challenge is, I think the demarcation point is once you start telling somebody that they must work a certain time, or I think even wearing a uniform, doesn't that shift you out of a 1099 into a W-2 once you are dictated?
Here's the thing. I think every state is different in how they sort of understand this, but there's a simple federal checklist they put out every year that doesn't change very often. It's a 20-point checklist that basically, depending however the auditor, it all comes down to the audits, right? So when your company gets the phone call and they say, hey, we're going to audit your company, Handy went through this, which is the marketplace for home cleaning, and they've gotten a lot of press just on how they basically didn't do well on this checklist. And the checklist says, is it clear that you provide materials to the workers? Is it clear that you provide direction as to when they show up and what they do? And there's such a gray line. And I think the unfortunate part is that these laws and these rules were derivatives of an existence that is now 10 plus years old, right? Uber gives drivers, the Uber dictates price, right? They 100% dictate price. And that's directly against one of the checklist items. So for me, what I bet on hard is that the rules can change fast enough to make the service as best as possible. Uber gives them the little Uber tags. They give them, marketing material. They do training courses. Like, they're doing the things that you would qualify them as an employee as.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part is if you were to put all of those as employees, now you have major costs associated with that essentially kill the business model. So it's not like companies want to scam the government and not make these people employees. It's that there's no way they can survive with unemployment insurance and things like that go into having a W-2 employee.
And medical insurance, to say the least. I mean,
all these things. I mean, just to think that there's so many things associated with a W-2 employee. Why is medical insurance associated with companies? Right? Why is it a thing? Why is car insurance not, right? To me, it's a fairly, what I'd imagine happened, and I don't know this for sure, but companies that were large enough were able to negotiate deals with health insurance companies, and then smaller companies want to compete with the larger ones, so they go out and offer health insurance. And now all companies offer health insurance. So now when you have companies like Uber and Lyft and Home Hero, there's no way we can afford to provide health insurance for someone who works 20 hours a week and makes $15,000 to $20,000 a year on our platform as a side project.
Interesting. So what are your feelings about this 1099 economy? Do you see people jumping from different marketplaces, or do you see that ultimately people will settle down? I mean, I don't see very often that you have a Lyft driver and Uber X driver jumping back and forth. It seems to be barriers to that. Certainly, Uber doesn't like that.
Yeah, well, I think for those guys, there's not a lot they can do about it. I do see a lot of drivers drive on both, and the ones who do drive on both say they make more money, and drivers who drive on one are just silly. But I think we're going to move towards water flowing as easily as possible. Right?
Gotcha.
If you have a car and it sits out in your garage, if you have an empty garage that someone could put stuff in it, if you have anything, right? If Airbnb is a perfect example of when you have excess space, why let that? People don't look at their physical things as value, right? Things that could earn them money. But once that mindset changes and they look at their extra time, their extra TV, their extra car, and their extra beach house and garage and driveway and everything, once those things start to looked at as commodities that I can put on a marketplace, then the whole mind shift changed. One of my good friends I told about relay rides. I said, Chris, you could put your car in relay rides and make $500,000 a month. And it just immediately changed his mindset when he had a few good experiences. He's like, why don't they do this for my parking space? My parking space is worth $300 a month. And sure enough, there's a service that does that. So I think when you get people hooked on one, they start to open their mind to all the other opportunities. And sure enough, there'll be products out there for them.
Yeah, I'm compensating for not hanging out with you guys long enough, but I'm probably going to go over a little bit. But just something like Airbnb, right? We're talking about the slight shift between you incorporated versus you as just a person. Where do you think that shift should take place? Because if I wind up, Airbnb being, my house a lot, and let's just say I wind up helping you out as a worker, and maybe I do a Lyft or an Uber every now and then. What does that become? I mean, what happens? I mean, where do you think that's going as far as all those different elements that we can commoditize?
Yeah, there's an interesting site called peers.org, I believe is the site, and they essentially are a education platform. I don't quite know that they have a firm identity, but they do a great job of sort of educating people on the different types of marketplaces. But I think it'll eventually come to a point of efficiency where everyone does the thing that they're most comfortable with, right? So if you want money, if you're looking for increased money, you'll put your car up, you'll put your house up, your extra room. If you're comfortable and you slide the scale to the right and you don't really want that increased hassle, you won't. But I think where the system breaks, Brian, is where the government comes in and puts in arbitrary / regulatory restrictions on the ability for people to do these things. New York is rough, right? Airbnb has struggles in all these different places, and even in airports. And they're just based on legacy rules. The fact that taxis have to pay $6 to pick someone up from an airport, I mean, that's just some tax that some guy came up with at LAX and spread it to other airports that now Uber and Lyft have to deal with and set that and essentially keep that same fee structure. So I think if we look forward to the future, it becomes successful where the fee structure remains fairly consistent for the government perspective. Otherwise, they're a giant liability to break everything. So they have to be getting paid somehow. A quick aside, in Australia, UberX was just launched in Sydney. It had gone through a whole litany of turmoil between the government because there was no way that they were getting paid. So what Uber decided to do was, we're going to pay the government $45 per driver per year. That was it, straight up. So they did that, and now they're able to launch. So they come to some negotiating point that allows them to just pay the government and not have them break their business.
Now I got to, again, getting an Uber show here. I got to turn it to Faisal. I mean, what does your equivalent of the 1099 economy look like with the technology infrastructure? What does it look like out there?
Over here, where I am is just a regular, you just file taxes for whatever is due to you. Actually, it's the person who's paying you, they have to deduct taxes. And they just give you a sort of a receipt that I've deducted taxes, and here's your receipt. When you file your taxes, you've already paid for, so you're already taken care of. So you just have to mention.
So are there marketplaces like we're talking about in your region that you can kind of compare and contrast to? I mean, compared to what Mike's doing?
No, not really.
Do you see that it's a technological barrier, a philosophical one, or just not there yet?
No, it's just not here yet.
Interesting.
I can't put a pulse on the finger as to why it isn't here, but it just isn't present right now.
Could you see something like Uber or Lyft or Airbnb working in your part of the world?
So it has started. Uber is available in the Middle East. It's available in India. It's available in a few other countries. And they do, again, there's a huge unionization over here, sort of a mafia, if you will, for transportation in all the developing countries. And obviously they don't take it very lightly. But the ability to rent houses, rooms, etc., that's slowly coming up. There isn't much legislation, although it's probably there, but not enforced. But I think marketplaces are just the natural evolution of things that they will have to, it's just like the internet, right? So everyone's going to be using it at some point in time. So I think certain countries are going to embrace it, certain industries are going to embrace it, and certain industries are going to see a lot of resistance. You can see what happened in the UK when Uber had, with the London Taxi Driver Association, the black cabs. France has the same thing. France went violent over it. They don't like that at all. Spain has the same thing.
I got to ask, like pedal taxis.
But one would think, hold on.
Yeah.
So here's my thing with it's obsolescence, actually. Obsolescence is what hurts. The cabbie driver in the UK was required to remember 28,000 streets by heart.
Wow.
That's the cabbie driver. So that's how you get a black cab driver license. You have to go attend the school. You say, okay, listen, I want to go from here to here, and then he has to recite immediately, flawlessly, which turn he has to take, which street he has to go to.
God.
In his head. So what killed that?
Rain Man as your taxi driver.
What killed that was one simple thing. GPS.
Yeah.
Killed it. But it's still there. They don't want to let go of it. I mean, if you actually go to YouTube and look at how the cab, there are a couple of videos which will show you, the cabbie sort of a split screen kind of thing. On the one side, the cabbie is telling you the directions. On the other side, the GPS is saying, yep, 100% accurate. They're very good at it. They're very, very good at it. But the problem is, you don't need it, right? GPS killed it. We don't need it. So why keep at it? But you can't just wake up one fine day and say, listen, hey guys, you're very good. We're going to have to let you go now. So what are they going to do? I mean, there are thousands of them. It's a very, very expensive proposition to get a black cab decal on your vehicle and so forth in the UK at least. So I think we're in the transitionary times. I think they'll have to understand that this is the sign of times. It's going to go away. It's like the red telephone booth in the UK.
Yeah.
It's now used for novelty purposes. It's now used for souvenirs. It's now no one uses them because there aren't any. They've been dismantled.
Yeah.
But it took some time, they were still there. I'm sure you could probably find a payphone where you live, but, how many people actually use a payphone? The company that put it up is probably losing money on that payphone.
A lot of times. So you get a lot of food delivery. Your typical food delivery person. All right. So do you think they're working for the company that's doing the delivery, the restaurant, combination of the above, or independent?
They're all independent. Very few actually hire them. So these riders or runners, as we call them, they are actually, sort of going up to a restaurant in the middle of the day when nothing is happening and say, hey, listen, I got my bike, I got my thing, I've got a carrier, I can put your logo on it, your stickers on it, and I'll wear your uniform. And, I want my base salary to be so much, and this is what I want on top. I want tips to be, and they sort of go and compete.
Wow. So it's a really vital economy on who winds up delivering.
Yeah, absolutely. So the delivery market is huge over here. I mean, it is unbelievably huge, and there's a lot of competition. So the bikers all over the place trying to cut you off, and trying to get killed and what have you. Well, just because someone's Big Mac is getting cold.
Yeah, it's getting cold.
But I think the original pizza delivery mechanism is what sort of expanded this market. It was always the pizza delivery in 30 minutes, or your order is free, and so forth. And then the others came on board, and and then things like coffee started getting delivered. I mean, coffee, seriously. I mean, it may be a normal thing in the U.S., but
coffee delivery is pretty rare. Starbucks is going to try to change that, but. So coffee delivery is big where you are?
It is becoming big. It is becoming quite big.
Really interesting.
I feel like it defeats the point of a coffee. Like, to me, a coffee is a break. I get to walk out of the office. And
No, but I'll tell you something. The one thing that you sort of, Brian, I don't know, it's far away. It's not like you have to go on a road for 25 minutes and drive in just to get to someone else's house. Everyone lives pretty close by. Restaurants, everything is pretty close by. So there's something pretty right. I would say your corner store is closer than what you would imagine. Wow. So it's not like, you're delivering from a suburb to another suburb. So so coffee is, the coffee shop is literally about 5 to 7 minutes away. Why not? So get it delivered, probably still be hot by the time it gets here. If not, the damn temperature is so hot, in the country.
Yeah.
There isn't leakage.
Boiling on the way to you.
Yeah. So I think marketplaces are definitely evolving. People are discovering it. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of people have sort of started or are looking at these crowdfunding sites as the first application of a marketplace, to say, okay, hold on, how can I raise money for a charity using everyone to come together and so forth and pitch in for a good cause? I think that's one of the first places, and eventually, the marketplaces for selling goods or selling services, et cetera, et cetera.
We could do shows on what crowdfunding is doing to startups, and it's primarily in hardware, but
I think
in software.
If you haven't noticed, this week, which is the last week of January, there is a crowdfunding effort. It was initially slated to raise $40,000 for Humans of New York, Honey, in New York, Brandon. He raised over $1 million. Wow. $1 million for a very, a school for troubled kids, et cetera, the teacher wanted 40,000 just to take kids to Harvard and Yale and say, hey, you can make it. But, she needed the money. Raised $1 million.
That's absolutely amazing.
Days. And still 10 days to go. And it is just phenomenal. So the power of one single person influencing millions of people to take the checkbooks out, of credit cards out and pay for it. Fantastic. But then people will say, well, that's New York. That's fine. That's New York. But that same analogy is going to inspire. No. It is scalable. It's going to export itself. It's going to replicate and clone itself in a different country. And someone's going to say, you know what? I'm going to climatize it to my local conditions, and I'm going to do the same thing, because it's a very simple thing, right? It's asking for donations for a good cause. And it's going to be replicated all over the world. It is being replicated. And crowdfunding was purely a US phenomenon. And crowdfunding has actually been going on for years. If you look at the telethons that you used to have Jerry Lewis, I guess, right? Jerry Lewis time, I guess, for the
end of the summer, the Muscular MD Foundation. It was a big deal.
So what is that? That's nothing more than crowdfunding, right? Reaching the goal. PBS used to do it. NPR used to do it. It just went online. And now with the online, there's instant, the ordered and copied and cloned and implemented elsewhere. It's happening.
Amazing. Yeah, we're living through transformations between marketplace and crowdfunding and all the infrastructure with payments and Bitcoin. I think we've kind of covered the future right here in one show.
Yeah.
I keep saying it, it's the behavior. It's not the technology, it's the behavior. The behavior is being mimicked. It's being mimicked, and it also at some point in time, it is being improved upon, being colored, if you will, for the local geographic location that you may be in, or the socio-economic fabric that may affect you and so forth. But it's behavior nonetheless.
And it's a fundamental shift. I mean, we're seeing, in a way, people around the world are resonating with a similar point of view about themselves, how they integrate within the economy, what their power is. And I think when the dust settles, that's going to do more to normalize behavior and break down some of the extremisms.
I have a friend, he jokes about it. He says, in a couple of decades, we won't have sunglasses. I said, why is that? He said, because we're always looking down on our phone all the time.
Yes, yes.
Oh, God.
It's bad.
It's an exciting time. Hope for good and good and for bad.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a wonderful get back together show.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. So to our listeners,
week we have,
who do we have?
We have Mike Dudas on the show.
This guy is brilliant. You guys got to tune in. He is onto something, as far as I'm concerned, that is the real paradigm shift. So get excited. I think we're going to have Mike unpack a whole lot of what he's been doing with Button, and we look forward to speaking to him.
Absolutely. All right, guys.
Have a good one, gentlemen. Take care.
Take care.
Next week.